I do want to speak on a particular topic, and the one I've chosen for today is a particular chapter. And I don't always do chapter sermons, but this particular chapter of Romans is often referred to as the Christian living chapter. And there are different types of sermons that are given. You can have sermons that are focused on doctrine, sermons on prophecy, sermons on Christian living. And there is doctrine that is Christian living. It's how we live. But there's a full chapter that discusses the life of a Christian. What is expected? What is it that we are supposed to meet? And what is the standard that is given for us as individuals of a part of a body that we're called to be a part of? Now, first, I do want to mention behavior is a vital part of the Christian life. We can't say, well, as long as I believe doctrine, as long as I have truth, then I have everything I need. Truth is important, but truth will lead you to behavior, which is vitally important for you individually and as a body. Years ago, during a major controversy, there were a number of individuals who made a statement, behavior is not a doctrinal issue. Now, when I heard that, I thought, that is contrary to what we are taught and what we believe. Behavior is very much a doctrinal issue. Before going to Romans, I want to turn to 1 Timothy chapter 3, because there are several places in the New Testament that point this out. But 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 14. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 14. Paul writes, "These things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly." But he said, "If I'm delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of truth." That over the years has become, I know I have a number of favorite passages, but there are certain ones that stand out in my mind, and that is one over the years, because he says there is a behavior and a conduct that is expected within the church. Sometimes people say, well, the church is getting personal. They're telling me how I need to live my life. Well, if they're telling you from Scripture, and that is what Scripture is telling you to live your life like, that is something that is necessary. But Paul says, I want to tell you how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God. So the church is the house of the living God. We're not called to be an island. We're not called to isolate ourselves. You are called to be a part of a body, part of something that God is working with, and you're not called to be alone. I've had individuals say, I'd like to counsel for baptism. They've called on the phone, and they said, I don't want to be a part of a church. I don't want to be a part of an organization. I don't want to be a part of anything. I just want to be baptized. And it's interesting. They'll say, I know it has to be by a minister of the church. It's like, wait a minute. You recognize that there's certain things that have to happen within the church, but you don't want to be a part of the church. But the church is the house of the living God. And we're not called to be alone. We're not called to be separated and to do things by ourselves. We're called to participate as a member of that body. And he says, when you're baptized, do you not realize you're baptized into a body? You're baptized into a group of individuals. So the church, or the called out ones, are called the house of God. And as such, there is a behavior that is expected, and it is very clearly doctrinal. And this particular chapter that I want to go through is actually a description of that behavior. It's a conduct, or a conduct of those who follow Jesus Christ and are actively using that spirit. Now, Paul says this house, the church, is the pillar and ground of truth. He said, this is where you go to find out about conduct. This is where you go to find out about behaviors. And again, we have to be a part of it. We have to be a part of that house, a part of that body, if we are to understand the behavior that is given to us. Let's go to Romans chapter 12. And Romans chapter 12 is this chapter known as the Christian living chapter. Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, and I'm going to read from the New King James Version. He says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Now, the first thing we notice, and we have to understand, sometimes when the apostles were speaking to the church or the letters that were written, it addresses who he is speaking to. There are some chapters where it starts off the same way, dear brethren, or I'm speaking to you, brethren, and people have said, no, that's them talking to the world. They did not go out and address the world as brethren. They were talking to the brethren of the church. So he said, I beseech you, therefore, brethren. So he's talking to the members, and he says, you have to present your body as a living sacrifice. And he said, that is our reasonable service. Translated from the Greek, from the Strong's Concordance, our reasonable service means your logical worship, or it's your rational service. It is the service, it is your actions and your conduct that is expected. It is your behavior within the body. So he said, I want to talk to you about these things, that you present yourself a living sacrifice because of the way it works you into that body. It's part of your service to the body. We'll keep our place here in Romans, but I want to turn to Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, because when we consider, okay, what does it mean to be a living sacrifice? We know what a sacrifice is, but to be a living sacrifice. Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, and we'll come back to Romans here. But Galatians 2 and verse 20, over the years, this is one of those memory verses that we should know. Galatians 2 verse 20, it says, I have been crucified with Christ. When you go through the conversion process, if you truly have seen yourself and repented of who you are, you understand it is being crucified. You put to death the old man. You put to death your behaviors. There are things within us in our human nature that we have to cut to the heart and remove because it does not fit. And so when it says you have been crucified with Christ, we have been in that conversion process. But he said, it is no longer I who live, but it's Christ that lives in me. We don't say, well, I've been crucified with Christ, and now I'm just going to live my life, and it's my choices as a Christian. No, we live our lives, and Christ lives in us. The righteousness that we produce is righteousness of Jesus Christ living in us, not our own righteousness. We go back to the Old Testament, he said, your righteousness is like filthy rags. But he says it is the Christ living his life in us. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God. Some translations will say faith in the Son of God. Oh, all you got to do is believe in Jesus. No, the original says the faith of the Son of God. He's living his life in you, and it is the faith that he had. It is the belief system and the understanding of Jesus Christ. It's the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So it is this living faith that is given to us, and it is allowing Jesus Christ to live his life in us. So we crucify the old man, we put to death the old man, and then we allow Christ to live in us. That's what allows us to go through that process, and as it says here, to be crucified with Christ as a living sacrifice. All right, going back to verse 2, Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. This is another one of my favorite passages because it describes the entire conversion process. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. So if you've ever asked, can you prove that something is God's will? How do you know what God's will is? God says you can prove what is the good and perfect and acceptable will of God. You can prove that something is God's will. It's something that he's desiring or wanting. But these two phrases, how does one conform? It says, be not conformed to this world. How do you conform to the world? The word actually means to pattern yourself after. Now, he says, don't pattern yourself after the world or to act in the same fashion. If people around you say, well, I can't tell them from somebody in the world, they act no differently. That's because you're patterning yourself and you look like or you're fitting into the way the world appears. But in other words, here we have two behaviors, two different patterns of behavior that are being discussed. He said one is conforming and one is being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Conforming can be seen in the following behaviors. And we see people doing this in the world, and it's a natural thing. Keeping up with the neighbors, or as I say in the States, keeping up with the Jones. That was an old term when I was a child, but keeping up with the Jones, keeping up with the neighbors. Oh, the neighbor's got a new car. I'm driving an old car. I need to get a new car so I look like I'm doing as well as my neighbors. Or, oh, the neighbors put up Christmas lights, and on both sides of me, I need to put up Christmas lights so I look like everybody else. I fit in. Or trying to have all the latest gadgets and styles. They've got the new iPhone, whatever, 20, which hasn't come out yet. But I've got the new iPhone, or I've got the big iPhone, or I've got an iPhone that folds in half, or I've got a phone that does this or that. And because of jealousy or envy, oh, my phone's 3 years old. I try to use my phone as long as I can without having to replace it. But phone companies, I don't know if you know this, naturally slow down your service so that you get frustrated. And they say, well, you can upgrade. If you upgrade, well, it'll solve all those problems. It's like I didn't have those problems until my time was up and I paid my phone off. Now I'm starting to have some issues. But people switch because of jealousy or envy. They've got a new phone. I need to have a new phone. I look like I'm old-fashioned. Or I remember when people went from flip phones to the iPhone. Oh, you're still using a flip phone? It was a way to look down on people. You're old-fashioned. Some of us can remember the first mobile phones in the cars. It looked like a giant walkie-talkie with an antenna, and it was on a cord to a box that sat inside the phone, or inside the car rather. And you had to pick up a satellite signal, and it was something major. And of course, people looked down on that very quickly after that. It's like 8 tracks. Oh, you don't have the new system in the car. You don't have these new things. So jealousy. It's trying to be accepted or fit into the crowd. Well, if I act as a Christian, if I tell people I'm not eating any leaven, or if some people during the days of unleavened bread, I don't want to be around people because I don't want to have to explain that I'm not eating leavening. But some will try to fit in to a crowd. Or they try to walk the line of Christianity and worldliness. Okay, I have to look like I fit in at work, so I'm going to be worldly enough that they'll accept me, but I still want to try to be a Christian. But you're conforming to the people around you and what they are doing, or trying to appear like everyone else. It is possible to conform to Christianity. We had that in the 70s and 80s where people conformed. They looked like Christians. They fit right in. They did everything. They even learned the doctrines of the church. And they looked like everyone else. But then when hard times came, they left very quickly. And you say, well, no, God's not going to allow people to come into church and look like Christians. Well, he says there's wheat and there's tares because they look alike as they grow. So being conformed to this world is looking like the world, or being conformed to the church. We have to ask ourselves, am I just conforming to what I see happening in the church, or am I being transformed? That is something that is totally different. Keep our place here in Romans again. Let's go back to Ephesians chapter 2. Again, I'm going to read from the New King James Version, but Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. This is a reminder of what we were called out of when we were conforming to the world around us. He said, he has now made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins. He said, before I called you, before I opened your mind to truth, you were going to suffer the death penalty just like everyone around you. And he said, you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world. He said, the world was on a course, and you were on that same course. You were patterned after them. According to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once conducted ourselves He said, your conduct was no different than the world. You could say, well, I was better than most people in the world, or I acted more Christian even before I was called. But he said, your conduct was the same. Or some translation, he said, some translations put it, you had your conduct like that of the world. In the lust of our flesh, left the desires of the flesh and the mind, and we were by nature children of wrath, just as others. So he said, don't forget what we were called out of. He said, you used to pattern yourself. You used to conform to those who are around you. But he said, we have now come out of that, and it's having a mind and a focus and a conduct, not just focused on the physical as the world is, but focused on God. And focusing on the physical usually focuses on the here and now. And society will even say that. Oh, do what makes you happy right now. Whatever makes you feel good, whatever is most beneficial to you, just do that now. And God says, you walk my way of life, it's hard, it's difficult, and you're going to have tribulations and trials. But it's worth that way of life. Barnes notes, with Albert Barnes, he states of this, be not conformed. He said the word is rendered conformed properly means to put on the form or fashion or appearance of another. It may refer to anything pertaining to habits, manners, dress, style of living, or others. So he said, the patterns have changed, styles have changed, and so I have to look like I'm part of the style changes. Years ago, just had a flashback. When I was young, this was before I was a teenager, I had a pair of elephant bells. And I don't know if you remember what elephant bells are. Do you remember bell-bottom pants? Elephant bells were huge ones, and they actually came all the way over your tennis shoes. They were one of my favorite pair of pants, and I remember they went out of style, and people started wearing bootleg, means it's boot cut, right down to the ankle. And I felt so awkward. And so I wore my bell-bottoms until they wore out. And some people would laugh, you're still wearing bell-bottoms. Once I got out of wearing bell-bottoms and I started wearing regular pants, I was like, why did I wear bell-bottoms? It wasn't something that I would look at now and say, oh, I would love to wear those again. So it's trying to look at, even with fashion, it talks about here the habits, manner, dress, and style, even the style of living. Pattern yourself after the world. So it says, do not be like the world. Don't try to be like others. And even within the church, to look at somebody and say, okay, I want to look like that. Well, it's better to want to become like that. So we're called out of it, and he says, I don't want you to be a part of it. I don't want you to pattern yourself or conform to the world. But rather, he says, be transformed. And that's an entirely different word, entirely different approach. And it is an approach that takes effort. It's easy to conform. All I got to do is look like I'm part of that. To transform means you have to become something different. It's not just to pattern or to copy yourself after something. It is to be changed by it. Barnes goes on about this word transformation. The word from the expression is derived from the word that means a habit, and the Greek word is morphe. M-O-R-P-H-E, morphe. It means to put on another form, to change the form of the world for that of Christianity. The word would properly refer to the external appearance, but the expression which the apostle uses is the renewing of the mind. It's not just look like or try to be like. He says, no, you change the entire mind. You renew the mind. It shows that he didn't intend to use this with reference to external only, but to the charge or the change of the whole man. So it's a change of the whole human being. And we know that is the conversion process. And you can't go through that change until you have that spirit that leads you to change and leads you to repentance. So we start with the implanting of God's Holy Spirit, and the transformation begins. And it's that transformation that we go through our entire converted life because we don't say, well, I've been transformed. I'm totally done. Pinch yourself, you're still physical. And you still look physical. You're still looking like everyone else. But there's a time coming when that transformation, that morphe, will continue to work until we are completely changed. Now it says it begins with the renewing of the mind. So this transformation starts with the renewing of the mind. In the Greek, that word means renovation. If you've ever renovated a property or a room or something, it's like you see these shows where they go in and change an old building or an old place and they make it something new. And they have demolition day. And they go in and they tear out the old cupboards and they tear out walls and rip the paneling and sheetrock off the walls. It is renovation of the mind. It's not just, oh, let's change a few things in the way you think. It's, no, you have to change your entire way of thinking. It is a renovation of the mind. So we develop and we mature, and then we eventually come to the point, which is a word that comes off this word morphe. It is a Greek word metamorpho, and it means to change into something entirely different. So the word transformation, he said, be transformed, be changed. He said, go through a metamorphosis. And if you know what a butterfly goes through, it changes from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It changes from a worm or similar to something that has no liking appearance to what it was before. It has gone through a complete transformation. For us, the transformation starts in the mind, but eventually we are changed to be composed of spirit. That is the final part of our metamorphosis or transformation. But to be composed of spirit is the ultimate goal in the transformation. But that transformation is not going to take place if we don't begin transforming in the mind. That's where it has to start. So many will say, well, I've been called, I have the truth, so I'm guaranteed transformation. God's not going to say, okay, now I'm going to change you to spirit being, even though you haven't changed the mind, you haven't changed your thinking. He doesn't just change us to spirit without the change in the mind. But if we pattern ourselves after the world, that's where you're going to remain, a part of the world. Now we get into some personal behaviors as we move into verse 3. And these are personal behaviors that are expected of any who are members of the household of God. And it's important to understand that because some have looked at this, so they look at Paul's writings to Timothy or Titus and say, well, that's to the ministry, that's to elders, that's to deacons, it's not to me. When he's speaking to the brethren, he's speaking to everyone. And the behaviors that are listed here should be behaviors that are becoming of any of us. So verse 3, it says, I say, through the grace given to me, that everyone who is among you, and he's speaking to the brethren, so he said, everybody who is here as brethren, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but rather to think soberly, as God has dealt with each one measure of the faith. So in our Christian behavior, the first thing he lists, he said, now I'm going to list some of these behaviors. I'm going to list how this transformation looks. He says, number one, avoid pride. Pride comes in many different forms, and we've discussed, even just recently, forms of pride. Pride can be vanity over who a person is. I'm better than others, or I'm different than others. I stand out above others, as in a vanity. Pride over knowledge. I have a degree. You will call me by a certain name, doctor, professor, whatever it is, because I have this certain knowledge. And again, we want to respect that. But is there a pride over that knowledge? You can have pride over looks, pride over athletic ability, pride over musical ability, or pride over intellect, or what I described before as intellectual pride. But he says, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to think. He said, don't put yourself on this pedestal saying, I'm in a really good position, comparing yourself among others. Matthew Henry's concise commentary says, pride is a sin in us by nature, which means it's by everybody around us. Everyone has, by nature, pride. But we need to be cautioned and armed against it. All of the saints make up the body of Christ, and who is the head of the body, and the common center of the unity. In the spiritual body, some are fitted for and called for one sort of work, and others for another sort of work. We all are here to do the good that we can, one to another, and for the common benefit. It's interesting, commentaries can pull some of those things out that it's easy to gloss over. Don't think more highly of yourselves, but do with what you have as God has given you the measure of faith. I like the next statement of what Matthew Henry states. He says, if we duly thought about the powers that we have, or the abilities, and how far we fail to properly improve them, it would humble us. But as we must not be proud of our talents, we must also take heed lest under the pretense of humility and self-denial that we're slothful in laying out ourselves for the good of others. So he says, don't swing from one end of the pendulum to the other. Don't say, well, I don't want to be proud, so I'm not going to focus too much on what I've given because I don't want to think to myself, oh, I've been given these special talents, so people avoid developing talents and skills and abilities when it should be that balance in the middle. And so it's interesting that he points out you don't want to swing from one side to the other. We don't want to deny doing what God has given to you as a special portion of that faith so that you are contributing to the body. Proverbs tells us, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in the power of your hand to do it. Now, God does give people the abilities and the power to do certain things, and we have to use that. But he's also saying, don't think more highly of yourself than you should. Now, Philippians also addresses behaviors and behaviors that we should have as a part of the fellowship. We'll come back to Romans, but Philippians chapter 2. Philippians 2 and verse 1. Philippians 2 and in verse 1. He says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if there's any comfort of love, if there's any fellowship of the Spirit, any affections or any mercy, fulfill my joy and be like-minded. He doesn't say pattern yourself like that. He says be like-minded, meaning you develop that mind. Having the same love and being in one accord and one mind. You see those phrases going all the way back to the beginning of the early church in the book of Acts. One love, one accord, one mind. Notice verse 3, it says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. The same statements about not thinking more highly of yourself than you should or avoiding pride. Don't let things be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in the lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. And let each look out not for only his own interest, but for the interest of others. The life of a true Christian is going to be one of humility, but it's also going to be love and service. And those are behaviors and conducts that are expected. Pride, on the other hand, destroys, while edification helps fulfill your calling. It helps fulfill what the role is that you were called to do, to edify others as part of the body. I'm not going to turn to these two verses, but I do want to give you those as references. It's Romans 14, verse 18. He who serves Christ in these things is acceptable to God and approved unto men. Therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things by which we may edify another. So he said, you seek the things that are to edify and help build up others, instead of trying to edify and build up the self. The other one is Ephesians 4 and verse 15. He says, speaking the truth in love, we grow up into all things, into him who is the head, Christ, from whom the whole body is joined and knit together. And we have to understand, he says, you're part of the body. You're not just out there by yourself. You're joined and you're knit together, which every joint supplies. meaning everybody has a part and each one contributes, according to the effective working in which every part does its share and causes growth of the body for the edification of itself in love. He said, everyone is brought together for a purpose to help one another and to strengthen one another. Vanity and pride are simply the exaltation of the self and the edification of self. But the behavior and Christian living that's expected of us is going to be something that helps the entire body. It is for the edification of the body. All right, let's go back to Romans chapter 12, and we'll move forward in verse 4. Because we're going through this conduct and the list of things that are expected and the behavior of a Christian. It was talked about the examining of ourselves in the sermonette. As we look at ourselves, we can ask ourselves, am I doing these things? This is a good thing to go through in the spring as we examine ourselves, saying, am I living up to the Christian standard? Verse 4 says, for we, or as we have members in one body, all the members do not have the same function. That's why we don't desire, I want to be like that person. I want that person's job, or I want that title. There's a purpose for why God places us where he does in the body. Sometimes you think, people have said, well, I want to do something different. This is where I'm being used, but I want to do something different. That may happen at some point, and many times it does, but let God use you where he has placed you, and he knows where you're going to be able to serve the best. In the placing of stones within the temple, they would reshape and rehewn stones to fit in different places. And sometimes it would be in one place and it's like, okay, we need that over here. They would reshape it and move it. May have placed you in the temple or the body where you were needed, but at some other place you may be needed in a different place. But he knows your talents and he knows the gifts that he's given to you. And he says, as each one has been given a measure of faith, he knows the talents and gifts that you have been given. Verse 5, it says, so that we, being many, are one body in Christ and individual members one of another. So we're all one body, but how do we become members one of another? Sometimes we can say, well, yeah, we're one body, we're one group of people, but individually, you're members of one another. I want to focus on this for a minute because I think many fail to understand what it means to have that relationship as Christians within the church, one with another. Albert Barnes says, we are one body, we're united together, constituting one society, one people, we're mutually dependent. Now, some people want to be independent. I don't want to rely on anybody, and I don't want anybody relying on me. No, he says we're mutually dependent, and we have the same great interest at heart. That's how we see the early New Testament church when they were in one accord. They had one mind, one thought. They had the same interest. And he says, though they are promoted by us according to our special tasks, or talents rather, and opportunities. So you are individually called, but he says you're called to be a part of that body. And again, we can't do it alone. We're expected to be mutually dependent. So when it says we're one body, but we're members one of another, there is a relationship that binds us together in a way that is far different from just casual acquaintances. We are to share the same interest. We share in the work that is being done. We share in the same calling to be a part of the church, the called out ones. We share in the same plan, because as we keep the holy days that reveal that plan, we talk about the plan. We talk, as we sang today, the Sabbath rest. We know that it is a rest, a weekly Sabbath, and it is a rest that is part of a future plan. But we share in that plan, and we have the same hopes and understanding of what that plan reveals to us. Albert Barnes goes on, he says, every member, or every one, members one of another. That is, we are so united as to be mutually dependent. Each one is of service to the other, and the existence and function of the one is necessary for the usefulness of the other. Thus, the members of the body may be said to be members one of another, as feet could not, for example, perform the functions or use if it were not for the eye, or the ear, the hand, the teeth, etc., would be useless were it not for the other members which work together, and they go to make up the entire person. Thus, in the church, every individual is not only necessary for his place as an individual, but is indeed needful for the proper symmetry and action of the whole. When God places us in the body, he said, okay, you're all going to be teachers, or you're all going to be instructors, or you're all going to be apostles. No, he said there's different positions, there's different responsibilities, there's different needs, and there is in every congregation going into the church itself. The work that we're doing is not a work of one man. Those of you who were around when Mr. Armstrong used to speak, he said, this is not the work of one man. And he used to say, when I die, the work is going to continue because this is the work that is given to the church. The church doesn't operate on a local level or international level because of one man. It is because of the head, Jesus Christ, and we understand that we're led by Christ, who is the head of the body, but it is the joining of the members to fulfill what Jesus Christ is trying to perform. But each one of us have to contribute our part. Just as in local services, everybody contributes different parts to make local services work. Or the Feast of Tabernacles. Some people who volunteer to work at the feast, it's interesting over the last few years especially, individuals who have never worked at the feast or volunteered for positions of service, and as they start serving, they're like, I never realized how much people do to make the feast happen. Even in just one little portion of it, they're like, there's a lot to even just the portion that I'm serving in, but there's so many different portions that if everybody didn't do their part, the feast wouldn't happen the way that it does. Let's go on to Romans chapter 12 and verse 6. So then, since each of us are given a part, or we're each placed in the body by God where he wants, he says in verse 6, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us. We're not all given the same gifts or the same talents. He said, let us use them. He said, if you're given gifts and abilities, use them. Put them to use for the edifying of the body. He said, if prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith. If ministry, let us use it in our ministering. He who teaches in teaching, he who exhorts in exhortation, he who gives in liberality, he who leads, do it with diligence, he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. So here are some of those gifts that are given. He's talking about and elaborating gifts. And I don't think we focus enough on individually what gifts have been given to us and how we are to use those gifts within the church. We are to use them to serve one another. He said, let us use them. Now you say, well, prophecy, I'm not called to go around and be a prophet. It says if you're to prophesy, let you prophesy in the portion of your faith. The word here actually means inspired speaking. He said, if you have been given inspired speaking, let us be inspired to the portion of your faith. Now, many of us have probably inspired another individual or been inspired by another individual. And as I was saying earlier, it doesn't have to be, well, this is somebody who has been given a title or position within the church. We have responsibility as members and as a part of that body, and part of those gifts is to inspire. It's obvious that God works through various individuals to reach people that he's working with or to edify them. He says, if it's ministry, let us use it in our ministry. And you can't say, well, I'm not a minister. I don't focus on that. Does it only mean those in the ministry? Do we ignore it because we're not in the ministry? Some looked at the messages to Timothy and Titus and they said, well, that's for deacons and elders. That's not a description of me. And I always say, well, does that mean you can have more than one wife? That's part of the description. He's telling them what is expected of somebody who's going to be moved into a position, But all of us should have those same standards. The word ministry here is a word that means attendant or one who is a servant. So he said, if you're a servant, then use those gifts for serving. Use it as an attendant or somebody who gives relief to others. Keep your place here. Well, let's go back to Luke chapter 10. Luke 10 and verse 40. We see a story here of something that was taking place, and you'll remember once you hear the story elaborated. Martha was distracted with much serving. That is the same word that was used as ministering. It means serving or ministering. Now, Martha wasn't a minister. She wasn't an ordained pastor or a speaker, and she was going out. She was serving. So as Martha was distracted with much serving or ministering, as she approached him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve, to minister alone? Therefore, tell her to help me. I can almost see that situation taking place. And she's like, I'm doing all the work. I'm ministering and serving people. My sister's supposed to be doing it with me. And what was it she was doing? She wasn't preaching like a minister. She was taking care of the needs and serving those around her. She was providing food and drink and making sure the people had what they needed to be cared for. Going back to Romans chapter 12, the next is teaching. He said, if you were teaching, and you say, well, good, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not a teacher. Today we have those who give sermonettes, sermons, split sermons, teen Bible studies, but it includes any who teach. You can teach by those who write articles, writing blogs, teaching Sabbath school, or teaching by example. You say, well, I'm not a teacher. Your actions speak louder than words. Sometimes you teach by your own behavior or by example. We'll keep our place, and this time we're going to go to Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2 and verse 1. I'm going to read from the New King James Version. It says, but as for you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine. So his message to Timothy and Titus over and over kept saying, teach the things that you've been taught. Teach sound doctrine. Don't veer from the things which you have learned. He says here to teach the things which are proper for sound doctrine. So these behaviors are doctrinal. And he says in verse 2, the older men be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, and in patience. So he said, you're supposed to be these things. The older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior. And again, this is a whole list of behaviors as well. Be reverent in your behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. So even women in the church are to be teachers of good things. How? That they admonish or they teach the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Likewise, exhort the younger men. So the older men teach and exhort the younger men to be sober-minded in all things, showing yourself to be a pattern of good works. In doctrine, notice what it says, in doctrine, showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility. Behaviors that are doctrinal. He said it is a pattern of good works, and in doctrine you show integrity. You show reverence, and you show incorruptibility. Sound speech that cannot be condemned, that the one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say of you. So there are descriptions throughout the New Testament of behaviors and conduct and how we live our Christian lives, the Christian principles that are reiterated throughout Scripture. Growing up in the church, I've learned from many who were not ordained or given titles or positions, but they taught me many things. Individuals who had a heart of service, and watching them serve, And most people didn't even know a lot of the things that they did because they served, not trying to be seen, but they served behind the scenes. Or women who had a gift of hospitality. Growing up and watching individuals as they hosted other people, or they brought people into their lives, or that they showed hospitality. And hospitality doesn't necessarily mean you bring them to the house. Hospitality is something that is shown. It means to invite. Are we using hospitality? Do we offer hospitality to the brethren? Next, it says, he who exhorts, use that for exhorting. Do we know what that word exhort means? It means something very similar to the word hospitality. The word exhort means to invite, to call near, or to be a comfort to. So he says, if you have been given this gift of exhorting others, use it for exhorting. Use it to call, to invite, to befriend, or to comfort. In modern terms, the word means to be hospitable. Someone who invites others to dinner. Someone who may have somebody to their home. Somebody who invites you just to be with them somewhere. Or can we talk? Can we spend some time together and just converse? Or those who are simply there to show comfort when something has happened. He said, we mourn with those who are mourning. We rejoice with those who are rejoicing. You're there to be with them and have that connection. They draw you near to them. They invite you in. They become a part of your life. And they are there for you. So he says, if you've been given a gift of exhorting or inviting or comforting, use that. Next, he said, he who gives, and the word gives means to share. So if you're giving, then use that. And you can be giving of your time. Most people think, well, giving, that means I give gifts or I give money. Sometimes people would rather have your time or your friendship or companionship or your abilities. There are people who are given special abilities or talents or have developed talents over the years that use those abilities or talents to help others. Sometimes it's of our resources, which may be our money and may be other things. Sometimes we simply share or give of ourselves. I've heard people say, well, I don't have things that I can share. You always have yourself. And in a relationship-based atmosphere in which God is creating, you can always give of yourself. Clark Commentary says, he that gives, he who distributes the alms of the church with simplicity and is not influenced by partiality, but divides each according to the necessity of his case, or taking care of needs as they arise, as we saw in the book of Acts. It said each one provided what the others needed. It says, he who gives, let him do it with simplicity. The word simplicity here is a word that simply means let him do it with sincerity. If you say, well, he who gives, let him do it simply. Okay, it's cut and dry. Here, you want this or not? That's not the way of giving it's talking about. It's let him do it with sincerity, without self-seeking, which is how he started off. Don't be focused on yourself or what you're going to get out of it. Do it with sincerity, to give generously. How many times have we seen people give of their time, their money, service, because they wanted recognition? That's not what it is speaking of and the behavior that's expected. Let's keep our place in Romans. We'll go back to Matthew 23. Matthew chapter 23 and in verse 1. Matthew 23 and verse 1. Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. They had positions. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that you observe, but do not do according to their works. In other words, he was saying, don't conform yourself to be like them. For they say, and they do not do. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear, and they lay them on other men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move with them one of their fingers. But all of their works they do to be seen by men. And that is nothing new under the sun. People doing things and doing good works to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best seats or best places at the feast and the best seats in the synagogue, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. Oh, you're my teacher. You're my wonderful instructor. Giving does not come by something that is seen by others. It may be seen, it may not be seen, but we don't do it to be seen. Sadly, some won't give or serve unless they're seen. And some aren't even afraid to express that. Well, if I serve in that position, nobody's going to know what I'm doing. And you're thinking, is that a problem? They want to be seen for what they're doing. Let's go back to Matthew 6 and verse 1. Matthew 6 and verse 1, Christ makes it very plain. He said, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven." He said, don't do things to be seen. Otherwise, you've got your reward. You were seen. Verse 2, "Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do." And that doesn't just mean you've got a physical trumpet in your hand. Some people go around and openly say, do you know what I'm doing here? Do you know how I've served in the congregation? Do you know what I've done for the church? That's sounding a trumpet. He said, "Do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may have the glory of men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward." They got the looks, they got the attention. He says, that's as far as it's going to go. It's the attitude, I don't want to brag or anything, but I've given more money to the church than anybody I know. And I just shake my head and I'm like, not impressed. Or I serve more than anyone else here and nobody recognizes what I do. I've mentioned that before, and I asked the person, is that what you're wanting, is recognition? Well, no, but I should be recognized for what I do. No, that means you're still looking for that recognition. Are we serving and giving with simplicity, with sincerity, which means a single purpose of caring for people without expecting something in return? That's a different way of caring, and that's what's expected. He says, when you do a charitable deed, verse 3, do not let your left hand know what the right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret. It's just like when he says, when you pray in secret. You don't go out and stand on a soapbox in the corner, or you don't start putting your hands up and praying out loud so everybody sees you're praying. He says you pray in secret. He said when you do charitable deeds, it may be in secret, and your Father who is in secret will himself reward you openly. The root word for simplicity, according to Strong's, is the word single. It means for a single purpose or a single reason. So if you're doing charitable deeds, you do it for a single reason, to serve others. Not a single reason of, I want recognition. A single reason that is good. All right, back to Romans chapter 12 and verse 8. And it's not just to leaders who have assigned positions as leaders, but he who leads or rules, do it with diligence. The word means to be in a position over others or to be in a leadership position. There are many people who are in leadership positions that haven't been given a title, but when you read the descriptions of those who should be ordained into a position, it's because they've already been fulfilling a leadership position or a leadership role. They've already been doing those things. So he said, if you lead or you rule, do it with diligence. Let him do it with diligence, and that word diligence means with eagerness or earnestness. He said, be eager to step in and say, let me help you know where you need to go. Let me help you in a direction that you need to walk. And again, it's not just about assigned or ordained positions. Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown says, if he who rules, whether in the church, and if you say, well, this is leading and ruling is all about positions in the church. Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown says, he who rules, whether in the church or whether it's his own household. You rule in your own household. Hopefully as mothers, you're ruling the children and you're directing and giving instruction to your children and you're leading them. He says, if you rule, whether in the church or your own household, 1 Timothy 3:4 and 1 Timothy 3:5, the same word is applied to both. You rule, you teach, you lead as parents, you lead as husband and wife, you lead even within a congregation or a family. You lead with diligence or with earnest purpose. Rule your household with diligence and integrity. 1 Timothy 3, verse 4 and 5, it says, one who rules well his own house, having his children in submission in all reverence or all respect. If a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? To rule your house, to lead or to be a leader in your house. You have a job and a role to fulfill. And in leading your family, often it is that example for other families or younger families or other individuals to follow. He who shows mercy, do it with cheerfulness. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. He says, if you're showing mercy, do it with cheerfulness. I know I'm supposed to show mercy to you, so I'll forgive you for what you did, and you're gritting your teeth. And no, you do it with cheerfulness, going, okay, I was wrong. I need to have this attitude of mercy and compassion. The word actually means compassionate or showing mercy. You show compassion to others, not because you're forced to, not because it's fake, but if you show mercy, do it with cheerfulness. Who can fulfill the role in the congregation of showing mercy or compassion? Any one of us. He says, do it with cheerfulness. Jameson, Foss, and Brown says this word cheerfulness, not only without grudging either trouble or pecuniary relief, but feeling it to be more blessed to give than receive, and more blessed to help than to be helped. That phrase, not doing it grudgingly, he tells us even of giving our offerings. He said, don't give your offering grudgingly. Here we go again. One of the 7 holy days, I got to give an offering. He says, do it with a cheerful heart. And again, it's the same thing here. When we serve others, when we show compassion, we do it without grudging. All right, back to Romans chapter 12 and verse 9. He says, let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. More and more people are becoming callous to what is evil and what is wrong. And sometimes when we see our brother getting caught up in something, or they're making mistakes that are going to be detrimental to their Christian life, do we help them or help another person by saying something? So many times it's, well, I don't want to get involved. This is their own personal thing. It's not my responsibility. Or, yes, somebody should go talk to them. Do we help our brother or show mercy to a brother by speaking to them? But are we loving and showing them what is right and what is good? It doesn't need to be offensive or corrective, but we can go to our brother in love and say, look, this is something I see going on. Could I help you in some way to be able to see what I see from my perspective? It says in verse 10, be kindly affectionate one to another in brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another. So in a chapter that focuses on Christian behavior, it says we are to be kindly affectionate to one another. And it's interesting, this word affectionate, according to Strong's, the original word means to cherish one's own kindred, especially parents or children. It means a fraternal love towards Christians. So it says to be affectionate one to another. It's like start treating each other as family. Love one another as family. Not only enjoying one another, and hopefully we come to church and we enjoy sharing time with the brethren, but it says to prefer one another. It's a preference. Clark Commentary says that which is translated kindly affectionate signifies a tender and indescribable affection which a mother bears to a child. There's a bond that's between them, and the mother wants to be with the child, and the child wants to be with the mother. And which is almost a creature's manifest towards their young, and the word joined to it signifies a delight in it. They feel the tenderest affections towards one another, and they delight to feel it. Love of a brother Christian with the affection of a natural brother. Somebody who becomes more than family. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my natural family, but I can tell you in the church, there are people that I am much closer to than even my own physical family members. We develop a relationship in the church that is so far superior to that physical relationship. Well, we're related by blood, or we have the same goals, the same destination, the same hopes, the same spirit is working in both of us, and there's something that binds us together much stronger than even that physical family. We share in those future promises of what God has called us to. We share in that same spirit, the same truth, and we share that same body. He says in verse 11, not lagging in diligence, or some translations put it, not slothful in business or purpose. He says, even in your Christian life, when you go out into the world, he says, don't go out and be slothful in business, because you're setting an example for others. You're teaching others. I've been in workplaces where people said, don't work too hard. You're making us look bad. It was like, I have to work hard. I kept working hard, and they moved me out of that department because people complained that I was working too hard. And you think, well, instead of replacing the people who didn't work, no, they moved me out of a department. Actually enjoyed where I got sent, but moved out of an area, but people don't work hard, and they don't want to work hard. It says, don't be lagging in diligence or slothful in business or purpose, but be fervent in spirit. Are you fervent in spirit? We just covered this recently. I spoke about this in Paddock Wood. Are you fervent in spirit? According to the Greek in Strong's Concordance, the word fervent is zeo, and it means to be hot. Are you hot in the spirit? Is it burning within you? Is it something that is exciting to you? Albert Barnes says this word fervent is usually applied to water or to metals, and it is heated to the point where it's boiling or bubbling with intense ardor in whatever it's engaged. And with Christians, it is the appropriate objects of their labor and engaging in them with intense ardor and zeal. He said, you've got an excitement that is inside of you, and you have to let it out because it's so fervent. Do we show that zeal and passion in our calling? Or do we say, well, I don't want to get too excited. I don't want to show people that I'm overexcited in God's way of life. He's saying we should. Do we share with the brethren a zeal for God's way of life? Having worked with the teens at camp for years, that is something where we try to explain to them and show them you can live God's way of life, and it is extremely rewarding, and it is blessed. And they start, after 1 week, go, okay, I haven't had my phone, I haven't had all these other things, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this week, and it has been fun living God's way of life. The time we live is not a time to be cold or even lukewarm. He says you to be fervent and hot. Verse 12, it says, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. These are principles of Christian living. Are we doing these things? Are we rejoicing in the hope? Do we stay focused on the hope that's ahead of us? Are we patient in tribulation? And are we steadfast in prayer? What is our prayer life like? He said part of your Christian behavior is to be steadfast in prayer, to be continual in prayer. Some have the gift of hospitality, and they use that. It's a spiritual gift. He says, distributing, verse 13, the needs of the saints, be given to hospitality. Use that spiritual gift of being hospitable. He said, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with them who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. In other words, be there with them, call them in, invite them to have a relationship with you. He said, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. Do we fervently pray for others, especially as we see the prayer requests or the updates that come in with addresses? Do we write them? Do we send them a card? Do we send them an email? Verse 16, be of the same mind one towards another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. It's interesting. He starts off, the first thing he says is, don't exalt yourself too high. Don't focus on pride. Be humble. And he comes back at the end and he says, do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. The bookends of don't have pride. Avoid pride on both ends. We started that chapter off with humility and we end with the same. The International Standard Version says, live in harmony with each other. Do not be arrogant, but associate with humble people. Do not think that you're wiser than you really are. Verse 17, it says, repay no evil for evil. Don't try to get back at people or hold a grudge against others, but have a regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink, for in doing so you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. This chapter is full of Christian living guidelines, things that we should be living up to, things that we should be avoiding. Chapter 13 goes on to how a Christian should behave or how he should relate in society with governing authorities, taxes, and other things. But there is a behavior that is expected within the house of God, which is the church of the living God. Romans chapter 12 tells us that we need to be working on our part individually and as a whole, as a part of the body collectively, and how we have to go through this transformation, not just conforming and looking like everybody else, but that transformation of mind where we're all becoming the same. We're becoming something new. As we go into the cold winter months ahead, and as we go through the season, as we prepare for the spring holy days, take heed, look at your life, and look at the behaviors of yourself as a Christian, and learn about the personal change and the developments as it relates to what Paul talks about here in Romans 12, of Christian living.